the last tree of the Golden Pass, a stunted, sun-bleached cedar, marked the end of the world Elian knew. Beyond it lay the red flats, a vast expanse of cracked clay and ancient stone that shimmered under a relentless copper sun. The humidity of the lake was gone, replaced by a dry, searing heat that tasted of cinnamon and old iron. Elian adjusted his hood, pulling the fabric closer to protect his skin. Every breath felt lighter here, as if the desert were exhaling the very essence of time. As he walked, the solid ground began to dissolve into patches of fine, orange dust. By mid-afternoon, the first true dunes appeared on the horizon, massive, golden waves of sand that stood as still as frozen mountains. He reached the edge of the great sand sea and hesitated. In his old life, a single step into such terrain would mean sinking to his ankles, each movement a struggle against the shifting earth. But then, he remembered the melody of the water spirit. Sands of time, breath of gold, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising whistle of the dry wind. As he stepped onto the first dune, something miraculous happened. The sand didn't give way. Instead, it firmed up beneath his boots, supporting him like a carpet of silk. He moved with a supernatural grace, gliding over the steep crests of the dunes as if he were walking on solid marble. His footsteps left no deep craters, only faint, shimmering ripples that the wind quickly brushed away. He climbed to the top of the highest dune and looked out. As far as the eye could see, there was only gold, amber, and shadow. The city of infinite sands was out there, buried somewhere beneath this shifting ocean. Elian felt the heart shard in his pocket pulse, not with the cool throb of the mountain or the rhythmic beat of the water, but with a steady, radiating warmth. The desert was vast, but for the first time, the traveler felt as light as the wind that guided him. As the copper sun dipped below the jagged edge of the horizon, the desert underwent a breathtaking transformation. The burning gold faded into a deep, bruised purple, and the heat vanished as if it had never existed. In its place came a crisp, sharp chill that smelled of dry stone and starlight. Elian pulled his heavy cloak tighter, but he didn't stop walking. Under the light of the rising moon, the dunes turned into silver waves, silent and eternal. This was the blue hour of the desert, a time when the world felt as though it were made of glass. He looked up and paused, breathless, away from the mists of the lake and the shadows of the mountain. The stars were terrifyingly beautiful. They didn't just twinkle. They burned with steady, multicolored fires. Diamonds, sapphires, and rubies scattered across a velvet void. The Milky Way looked like a river of silver dust, flowing directly into the dunes ahead. In this absolute silence, Elian began to hear the singing sands. As the temperature dropped, the shifting grains of sand deep beneath the surface created a low, melodic vibration. It was a sound like a distant cello, a deep thrum that resonated through the soles of his boots. Suddenly, the heart shard in his pocket flared with a warm, amber light. In response, a constellation directly above him, the one known as the Navigator, seemed to pulse. A single beam of starlight fell onto a distant, flat expanse between two massive dunes. There, half buried in the silver sand, was the tip of a black obsidian obelisk, its surface etched with glowing runes. The desert was no longer an empty void. It was a map, and the stars were the ink. Guided by the warmth in his pocket and the fire in the sky, Elian moved toward the dark stone, his desert step making him feel as though he were gliding over a frozen sea. The first clue to the buried city was finally within reach. The obsidian obelisk stood like a silent sentinel against the star-washed sky. Its surface was as smooth as still water and as cold as the winter moon. As Elian drew closer, the amber glow from his pocket intensified, making the ancient runes on the stone pulse in time with his own heartbeat. He reached out a gloved hand and brushed away a layer of fine dust. The moment his fingers touched the cold stone, the desert floor began to tremble, not with the violence of an earthquake, but with the gentle rhythmic hum of a giant clock coming back to life. Hush, the sands seemed to say. In a perfect circle around the obelisk, the dunes began to swirl. The sand didn't just move. It flowed downward like golden silk, disappearing into an invisible drain. The sound was hypnotic, a continuous, soft shh that filled the night air. As the grains retreated, they revealed a spiral staircase carved into the living rock beneath the desert, winding down into a cool, dark abyss. Elian stood at the edge of the opening. Below, he could smell the scent of old parchment, dried ink, and a strange, metallic freshness. The breath of a city that had been sealed for 1,000 years. He raised his ether light the green glow reflecting off the obsidian walls, creating emerald sparks that danced into the depths. With a deep breath, he stepped onto the first stair. The descent was quiet and cool, the heat of the surface fading away with every step. He wasn't just walking into a ruin. He was stepping into the memory of a world that the sun had tried to burn away. The city of infinite sands was no longer a myth. Its doors were finally opening, one grain of sand at a time. The air at the bottom of the stairs was ancient, still, and tasted of dry lavender. As Elian stepped into the Hall of Frozen Hours, his lantern light hit the first of many massive glass structures. They were hourglasses, each one taller than 3 men, carved from pure desert quartz. But as he walked between them, he noticed something impossible. The sand inside the glasses wasn't falling. Millions of tiny golden grains were suspended in midair, frozen in the middle of their descent. It was as if the heartbeat of the city had stopped in a single silent moment. Elian moved slowly, his boots making a soft tink sound on the polished obsidian floor. The silence was so thick, it felt like a heavy blanket. As he passed one of the larger hourglasses, he raised his light to the glass. Inside, he could see a single grain of sand glowing with a faint blue spark, a Chronos seed. He realized that the city of infinite sands didn't just store books. It stored time itself. Every grain of sand in these glasses represented a memory, a day, or a dream from the old world. At the far end of the hall, a massive archway loomed, guarded by 2 statues of scholars holding open books made of gold. Unlike the other hourglasses, the one above this archway was still moving. 1 grain, every few minutes, fell with a sound like a heartbeat echoing through a canyon. Thump, tink. Elian followed the sound. The rhythmic drop of the sand was hypnotic, pulling him deeper into the hall. He wasn't just walking through a room. He was walking through a pause in history. As he reached the archway, the warmth of the heart shard in his pocket began to hum in sync with the falling sand. The library of sunken memories was just beyond the veil, waiting for the one who knew how to listen to the silence of time. Behind the archway lay the heart of the city, the library of living dust. It was a cathedral of knowledge, where the walls stretched so high they seemed to merge with the darkness of the earth above. Every shelf was carved directly into the warm amber rock, holding thousands of books bound in sun-faded leather and etched with silver thread. The air was heavy with the comforting, sweet smell of ancient parchment and vanilla. Elian walked down the central aisle, his footsteps muffled by a thick carpet of golden dust that felt like walking on a cloud. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering over the spine of a massive volume titled The Breath of the Stars. As he touched the cover, a soft cloud of crystalline dust rose from the book. But instead of disappearing, the dust particles caught the green glow of his ether light and began to swirl in the air. They formed delicate, glowing shapes, images of ancient kings, flying ships made of glass, and maps of constellations that had long since vanished from the sky. The book stayed solid in his hands, its pages cool and heavy, but the air around him became a living tapestry of light. Elian didn't read with his eyes. He felt the stories through the vibrations in the air. He heard the faint, ghostly rustle of pages turning themselves, a sound like 1,000 butterfly wings waking at once. He sat on a stone bench, the glowing dust dancing around him like tiny, silent fireflies. In this room, every secret ever told was kept safe from the sun. He opened a smaller book near the center of the room, and as the dust rose, it showed him a golden path leading deeper into the city, toward a vault hidden beneath the sand. He wasn't just a reader anymore. He was a guest in the world's most peaceful memory. At the very base of the library, behind a curtain of shimmering sand, Elian discovered the Vault of Whispers. The room was perfectly circular, its walls lined with mirrors of polished copper. In the center, rising from a mound of pure white quartz sand, stood the silver tree. It was a masterpiece of ancient alchemy. Its trunk was forged from moonlight silver, and its 1,000 delicate leaves were shards of translucent crystal. There was no wind in this underground vault, yet the leaves trembled constantly, creating a sound like 100 crystal harps played by a gentle breeze. Tink, chime, ring. This was the Tree of Echoes, the living archive of the city's voice. Elian approached the tree, his ether light turning the crystal leaves into a forest of emerald fire. He noticed that each leaf was etched with a single word or a musical note. As he drew closer, the tree sensed the warmth of the heart shard in his pocket. One of the silver branches lowered itself toward him, as graceful as a swan's neck. A single crystal leaf brushed against the metal of his lantern, and suddenly the room was filled with a soft choral hum. It wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling, a wave of calm that washed over him, smelling of rain on hot stone. Elian reached out and gently touched the silver trunk. He felt the vibration of the city's entire history flowing through his fingertips. The tree was telling him that the sands were not a tomb, but a blanket, protecting the world from a truth too bright to face. He sat beneath the silver boughs, the rhythmic chiming of the crystal leaves lulling his senses into a state of perfect clarity. Here, in the roots of the world, time didn't just stand still. It sang. As Elian rested beneath the silver boughs, the humming of the tree began to change. It was no longer a song of the past, but a whisper of the future. The crystal leaves above him vibrated with a sudden, soft intensity, glowing with a pale amber light that matched the heart shard in his pocket. Slowly, from the very highest branch, a single leaf detached itself. It didn't fall like a heavy stone. It drifted through the air with the lightness of a snowflake, spiraling down through the copper-mirrored room. Elian reached out his hand, and the moment the crystal touched his palm, it transformed. The leaf curled inward, hardening into a smooth, tear-shaped crystal. The starlight seed. Inside the crystal, a tiny flame of golden light flickered, pointing consistently toward the southeast. Even as Elian moved his hand, it was a compass of light, a guide designed to pierce through the thickest sandstorms and the deepest nights. The sun vault awaits. The tree seemed to whisper one last time, its silver branches slowly rising back to their original positions. Elian stood up, feeling a renewed sense of warmth spreading from the crystal to his entire body. He placed the seed inside his lantern, alongside his ether light. The two glows merged, one green and emerald, the other golden and amber, creating a soft, lime gold radiance that illuminated the dark corners of the vault. He took a final look at the silver tree, its crystal leaves now quiet and still, returning to their long sleep. With the starlight seed as his guide, the path through the sunken city was no longer a mystery. He turned away from the silver light and stepped back into the shadows of the corridors. His footsteps light and purposeful, ready to find the sanctuary that lay hidden beneath the dunes. The passage leading away from the Vault of Whispers was different from the grand halls Elian had traversed before. Here, the walls were lined with a porous, velvet-like sandstone that seemed to swallow every vibration. As he stepped deeper into the tunnel, the world behind him vanished into a silence so profound it was almost tangible. In the tunnels of absolute silence, even the rustle of Elian's cloak seemed to fade before it could reach his ears. The air was cool and perfectly still, neither rising nor falling. He walked with a slow, deliberate rhythm, his feet barely touching the soft, dusty floor. Without the distraction of sound, his other senses began to sharpen. He could feel the gentle warmth of the starlight seed radiating from his lantern, a steady pulse of gold against his chest. He noticed the way the light reflected off the tiny quartz crystals in the walls, creating a faint, shimmering path that looked like the interior of a star. He began to listen to the only sounds that remained, the slow, rhythmic beat of his own heart and the soft, ocean-like hum of his own breathing, in and out, in and out. Every worry, every memory of the burning sun above, and every fear of the unknown began to dissolve in this heavy, comforting quiet. It was as if the tunnel were washing his mind clean, preparing him for the sacred place ahead. He felt light, as if he were drifting through a dream without a shore. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of peace, a soft embrace that told him he was exactly where he needed to be. At the end of the silent passage, the tunnel opened into a vast, domed chamber that felt as wide as the desert sky itself. In front of Elian stood the great sun clock, a circular gate made of golden sandstone, etched with the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars. But here, deep underground, there was no sun to cast a shadow. The clock was waiting for a different kind of light. Elian stepped forward, his heart calm and steady. He lifted his lantern, the combined glow of the emerald ether and the golden starlight seed shining like a miniature sun in the palm of his hand. As he directed the beam toward the center of the stone clock, the runes began to drink the light. One by one, the carved constellations on the gate began to glow. Then, a sound broke the silence, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floor and into Elian's very bones. It was the sound of ancient gears, made of stone and magic, turning for the first time in an age. A deep grinding, like stone sliding on stone. The massive doors didn't swing. They slid sideways into the walls with a heavy, rhythmic motion. Dust fell from the ceiling like a soft, golden rain, shimmering in the light of the lantern as the portal opened. A breath of warm, incense-scented air drifted out, smelling of sandalwood, myrrh, and a sun-warmed earth. But there was something else, something unexpected, a faint hint of moisture, a subtle sweetness, like distant rain on green leaves. Beyond the gate lay the sanctuary of the sun, a place where the light was never lost, only hidden. Elian lowered his lantern, the path ahead now wide and welcoming. The threshold was crossed. The desert's greatest secret was finally revealing its golden heart. As Elian placed the heart shard into the white marble altar, the response was immediate. A wave of golden light surged through the chamber, but as it touched the far walls of the sanctuary, the color began to change. The amber glow shifted into a deep, vibrant emerald, pulsing like the heartbeat of a hidden jungle. A low melodic rumble shook the floor. On the eastern wall, a massive set of stone doors, entwined with ancient copper vines, began to groan open. For the first time in centuries, the seal was broken. Elian stood frozen as a sudden gust of air rushed into the dry temple. It didn't carry the scent of dust or spice. It was heavy with the smell of wet moss, crushed ferns, and the sweet, intoxicating perfume of night-blooming jasmine. The air felt thick, cool, and alive. He walked toward the threshold and looked out. He wasn't looking at more sand. The path led into a vast, underground canyon where the ceiling had long ago collapsed, letting in the starlight and the rain. Below him lay a sea of giant glowing leaves and trees, so tall their tops were lost in a swirling emerald mist. In the distance, he could hear the rhythmic drip, drop of water falling onto broad leaves, and the distant, haunting call of a forest spirit. The desert had kept its secrets, but it was merely a guard for the world's oldest garden. Elian tightened his grip on his staff, his eyes reflecting the lush green glow of the path ahead. The heat of the sun was a memory now. The emerald labyrinth was calling, and its vines were already reaching out to welcome the star-bearer into their deep, velvet shadows.